Hello, and welcome to Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. My name's Craig Burtwhistle, and I'm really excited to have Andrew Stevenson as our guest today. I've known Andrew for a long time. We go way back to the school days of Great Bar Secondary School in Birmingham. Some dark, dark days right there. No, only joking. Since then, we've moved in different yet similar directions. Andrew and I have connected many times via social media, bouncing ideas back and forth, just like so many of our listeners. Andrew started Streetly Coaching as a single coach in 2017, but has now grown to include a full team of staff and has had a 350% increase of children enrolled in the program. This is impressive stuff. However, more impressive is that out of those players, 30% of those children, all aged between 7 and 14, have confirmed or suspected neurodiversity. Parents have been quoted and told Andrew that Streetly Coaching is a safe place for their child, and that must be the best feeling in the world. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Well, I was all right until you reminded me of the dark days of secondary school, which I've spent 25 years trying to forget. But yeah, all good. And it's good to see you haven't lost the accent as well. 15.
I've really tried my best to hold on to that,
Yeah,
and that was all part of the counselling of getting over Great Bar School. So,
Good,
yeah,
man.
so Andrew, let's delve in a little deep into this episode. Let's start about your background. How did you get interested in football?
Football as a whole, I think I've been interested in it for as long as I can remember. I think my earliest memory is being a 7-year-old sobbing young boy being put to bed after we were knocked out of the 1990 World Cup in the shootout with Germany. So it goes way back. In terms of played from about the same age. I think from the age of 8 onwards, I was in the Warwickshire leagues. I'm not sure what they're called now, if they still exist. Played up until I was in my teens. Then I got a job, and like many of us, I kind of left football by the wayside. Still played recreationally with friends on weekends and in power leagues and five-a-side leagues and things like that. But got to my 30s and just felt like I needed something more, needed football back in my life more. I was always watching it, always going down Birmingham City every weekend, watching us get battered. But other than that, I wanted to be involved in the game again. I had a lovely family, a good job, but I needed something else. And it was my girlfriend at the time, my now wife, said, well, why don't you look into coaching? Never really given it a thought. So made some inquiries, went out, did my badges, as they're called over here, FA badges. Didn't know to what end I was doing them, had no plans beyond that. And then took it from there, decided to leverage some local relationships that I had in the area. Had those because at the time our 2 oldest boys were 7 years old and both in primary school. So I took our 2 lads and asked if any of their friends fancy getting coached as well at the same time, and started on a Saturday morning. My 2 boys and I think 8 other kids from the local area. And it just snowballed from there, really. And here we are, as you said, we're 7 years on. 54 kids, I think, at last check, and a team of 5 coaches. I roped in a good friend of mine 7 years ago called Dave, who's still with me. So he's my number 2 at Streetly Coaching, and it's every Saturday now going forward. That's what we do.
I love that. You speak about the fact that it's just organically grown, basically, hasn't it? It's and it all started from just a passion that you had for the game.
Yeah.
So you wanted a little bit more, and I'm sure obviously your boys, as they grew up, sparked even more interest in you then as well, because you wanted to get coaching, correct?
Yeah, for 2 different reasons actually, Craig. My two eldest, who were 7 at the time, they're now 14. One has neurodiversity, one is autistic, and my other lad is what we call neurotypical. So I'll speak, as we go on in this, I'll speak a lot about typical and diverse, and it's just in that context. So my lad who's typical is obsessed with football. And so in that regard, that's what kept me in the game a lot in terms of coaching. My other lad, who same age, who is neurodiverse, he has autism. It was one of the drivers of what we do at Streetly Coaching and how we saw the number of children coming through with neurodiversity. It was seeing what he was getting from that at the same time whilst he was there. So my 2 different boys were getting very much different things at the same time from it, and that was a driver with what we end up becoming, which is what we are today.
So you say that was kind of like the drive. So I'm guessing that's kind of like your motivation.
Yeah.
Was there any more motivations other than the passion and obviously your boys' needs?
Well, I think football, like many sports, it's transferable into life. So I won't spit out the usual cliche figures of how many kids make professional footballers, because we all know that. But what it does give you, along with any other sport, is your discipline, your teamwork, your hard work, learning how to lose, effective leadership, and these are all qualities that you can take into later life. So whether you're an employer, an employee, a partner, whether you become a parent, whatever it is, they're skills you can take in. So I think I wanted both my boys to have that, as well as their friends, which is what it was about at the start. And then we started to get inquiries. And my motivation at that point was that I didn't like to say no. I didn't like to turn people away. So one session became two, became three, and that's how we got to where we are.
Fantastic. And I like the way you say that life has basically shaped your motivation, because it does for all of us, whether it's like money orientated, because obviously we need money to pay for our mortgage, to pay for our kids' foods, their clothes, everything along those lines. And there's also motivation internal, where it's like your passions and so on.
Yeah.
Obviously, life dictates your motivation. Also, I've been explaining to coaches that life really determines your philosophy of how you coach as well. So how have you came up with a coaching philosophy over the years?
Oh, this is a really tough question. I always feel like this is the kind of question that you need to have wrapped up in a sentence, but I think it's more nuanced than that, and you learn that as a coach as you go along. I think it's fourfold for me, certainly for what we do at Strictly Coaching. So our motto, so if you go and look on the Facebook page, you'll see that it's Strictly Coaching, nurture the game. And I think what we mean by that is perhaps nurture the love of the game. So we get them for an hour a week, that's all. There's only so much we can do in that time. So what we're trying to do is encourage them to leave us after an hour and seek out football in any other medium. So whether that's we want to watch it, we want to play it in the garden, we want to go down the Blues or the Villa, preferably the Blues, or we want to even play it on the PlayStation or the Xbox. Whatever it is, it's all about football. So we're trying to encourage them with that. So I think that would be the first part of our philosophy. Secondly, and I think this is really important, more so with the younger end of our groups, the 7, 8, 9-year-olds, we try to have a ball at their feet all the time. So it's about having one football for every one player. If they haven't got a ball at their feet for 75% of the session, give or take, we're probably doing something wrong at that age. Your red corner, as we call it, your technical side of the game, it's really, really important, especially at that age. So it's about getting them on the ball, getting them as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible. One of the measures we have in our philosophy is if they're running to us rather than the balls that are off the side, we're probably doing something wrong. We want our players to turn up and, where are the footballs, try and seek them out straight away. So that's another measure. That again is probably part 2 of our philosophy. Part 3, and we have this luxury because when we don't work in a competitive environment, we encourage mistakes, and by that I mean that we don't want to hear apologies for a misplaced pass or a shot that goes wide. We don't want them to not try and get around the defender another time if they failed 4 times already. You don't have that luxury in competitive football. You have to perhaps find another way straight away. With us, it's about making the mistakes. We want our kids to fall over doing a rainbow flick. We want them to figure it out for themselves. But what we do on the back of that, try to say to them is, if you are going to make these mistakes, which you will, and we encourage, try and problem solve at the same time. So why are you on your face in the mud rather than doing a rainbow flick? Try and figure it out. Why have you not gone around that player after 4 times? Come to us, we'll work with you. That's why we're there. So it's about making mistakes. And then the last one of the 4, I think, is resilience. I know, again, it's very cliche, but it's very easy on a cold Saturday morning when the rain's coming down, and we're seeing it this weekend coming, I think, to think, I don't fancy it today. I won't get up. I'll give it a miss. It's only it's only training, it's only practice, it's only coaching. I think having the resilience to get up, turn up, pick that ball up is what it's all about. It's half the battle is getting there on a cold Saturday, wet, dark morning. So I think if I was to sum up the philosophy, it would be turn up, get yourself on the ball as quick as possible, make some mistakes, and then fall in love with the game as you do.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've heard many times on all these coaching courses that I've done about exactly what you said, about a philosophy that needs to be able to be put on a sticky note. That's how small it should be. I don't think it works like that. I think, as you said, it's got to be ingrained in everything that you do. I feel like a philosophy should dictate how you are as a coach. And everything that you've said, those 4 points that you brought up are brilliant, because it does sum up Streetly coaching perfectly. After doing my research, after knowing you for many years, and we've talked back and forth about Streetly, and just seeing like the reviews online, which are glowing, by the way, absolutely amazing, what I read on the Facebook account. If you go in and you see what Andrew's done, you'll see all those 4 points that he said come out threefold. It is fantastic, and the parents speak about all those sort of things in those reviews. So if you do get a chance, check out their Facebook page, look at the reviews. If you're anywhere near those areas, I do strongly suggest you reaching out to Andrew, see if there's any availability. As we move forward, we'll be back after a short message from Zencastr. We're going to talk to Andrew about how he's teaching of children with special needs. Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Session Share. Zencastr makes it super easy to produce a high quality broadcast with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns. Zencastr makes it super easy to produce a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Welcome back. We're going to go into a bit more detail in developing players, in particular players with special needs. Andrew, can you tell us first, what was your motivation in helping these kids through soccer?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I go into this, Craig, I think it's important for me to note a couple of things. Very importantly, I am not qualified in any way in the development of neurodiverse children. I have no qualifications in it other than the fact that I am a parent of two. I have 3 boys, 2 of which are on the ASD spectrum, the autism spectrum. Beyond that, my qualifications are coaching. The fact that I'm a father with neurodiverse children and the fact that I've been coaching and I'm qualified to do so, I think I am in a good position to blend the two. I think I mentioned earlier that I'll be using the term diverse and typical, and that's just to differentiate those on the spectrum of autism, those not. So those typical children. So I mentioned my 2 boys, my 2 oldest boys earlier when I started coaching. Around the age of 7, when I began this, we started to see Oliver, that's our diverse eldest, we started to see his neurodiversity bear out. With him, it was in a social setting. So he became, in particular with Oliver, he became very difficult for him to read social cues. So I'll give you some examples with that. If you and I were talking and chatting and I put my arm around you and we were laughing and you moved away, you and I would know that's a cue for me to understand that you are perhaps a bit uncomfortable. You don't necessarily want that kind of contact. With Oliver, it was a cue for him to lean in closer because the person was getting closer away, just further away, just didn't understand it. So that was really bearing out at that age. Football was a way for Oliver at that point to have some common ground with other children. As you know, we're a massive footballing nation. So whether it's in the playground, the schoolyard, at clubs, in the park, wherever it is, you inevitably come across football. So I think any child I think you'd be lying if you said that any child that wasn't into football didn't have an advantage socially, because I think they do. So being there on a Saturday gave Oliver that kind of little bit of, extra 5-10% for him to be relatable with the other kids, and he enjoyed it. I think then, because of that, I started to see some of Oliver's friends being interested in joining as well. So a lot of Oliver's friends group, I wouldn't say they were all diverse, but he certainly gravitated towards children of that ilk, because that's what happens in those settings. So we had a couple more join who were, not necessarily autistic per se, but certainly were perhaps in that realm, would later go on to be diagnosed with it. And they joined, and we had some typical children as well. And I just saw the blend of the two. So my motivation at that point became, this is a real common ground for those children who in other settings, perhaps in the classroom or perhaps at children's parties, which they're all going to, same parties, friends from school, they weren't having that common ground, but all of a sudden they were on the football pitch. And I thought this could work. Also, another motivation at the same time, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but over here, I imagine it's perhaps the same. But here, when they get to about the age of 8, 9 and 10, that's when the children start to filter off and join teams and play competitively. So what was happening was the kids were coming to me for a short period of time, and where they were typical, they would go off and play in teams. Some would stay with me on a Saturday, some would leave. Where they were diverse, they wouldn't. They weren't comfortable enough, or they didn't have the drive to do so, or the parents were perhaps reluctant to put them in competitive football, which I can talk about later on in a bit more detail, which I understood. So we would then see from the age of 9, 10, 11, more diverse children joining for the first time who had no experience of football, couldn't just be dropped into a competitive footballing environment. So Strictly Coaching became ideal for them. It was low to zero pressure, but with the same physical output, the same output of progression in terms of football knowledge as well. So that became another motivation. I did mention the parents a few minutes ago, and not perhaps encouraging kids who are diverse to join teams. Now, I can say that from my own point of view. So as well as my 2 older boys, I've got a younger child called Lucas. Now, Lucas is also ASD in a very different way to Oliver, but he is. And he's 9 years old, and he's at very different point to his peers in terms of his technical ability with football. Perhaps some of that's my fault because I started him a bit late, but certainly with his emotional stability, let's say. And I think that if Lucas was to be dropped into a competitive environment, training in the week, playing on a Sunday, being hammered about how he did in a position and whatever else comes with it, I think he would struggle. So I understand parents in that position who aren't encouraging their kids to join teams. So as our ages went up, you saw more and more. I haven't run the numbers, but perhaps that 30% was greater in the older end than it was in the younger end. I don't know. So my motivation in a nutshell for helping them was to maintain a safe environment where children with no interest in moving into competitive football, diverse or typical, could still come along, play football, enjoy, learn without the pressures of competition league football, which I've played, you've no doubt played. We know what it's like. So, but we did we developed some good affiliations with some local clubs as well. I coach at other clubs, and so do 2 of the other coaches who work with me. So if kids do decide that, oh, coach, I want to join a team, is there anything for me? We've got the avenues to do that. But if they don't, it's fine. You can stay with us. I've got 2 who have been with me, excluding my own kids. I've got 2 who have been with me from the age of 7, and they're still with me now at 14, and they have no interest of playing competition football, and they're happy. They've got other interests outside of this, and they play with us on a Saturday. So yeah, I think I've gone around the houses a bit with it, but I think in a nutshell, it was giving them again, it's cliche, but it's a safe space for them, safe space for those children.
That's fantastic, and it shows that the parents have so much trust in you because of your experiences both as a parent and as a coach. And what do you find has been like the biggest obstacles as you as a coach of the players and or the players you have? What do they have to conquer?
You're talking about diverse children in particular, are you, at this point? Yeah.
A little bit of
Um,
both, to be honest. Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in those players, but like I know you coach both
yeah, yeah.
people with
Well,
it, with or without.
I think, Craig, you're probably, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, and you would have seen the boundaries for your typical child. So I don't think there's anything I can say on this podcast that's going to enlighten anybody. But I don't think a lot of coaches work with children on the ASD spectrum. So I will talk about that. Um, I would say, as a coach, one of the biggest ones to deal with is boundaries. So it's making, perhaps making isn't the right word. It's helping or encouraging those children to understand boundaries on the football field and off the field, for that matter. So diverse children can struggle with boundaries. They can struggle with physical boundaries. I mean, I gave you that example earlier with Oliver. Some of them are like that, not all, but some. They can also struggle with socially acceptable boundaries, so language or etiquette. So, things you just don't say in the moment. Now, when they're children, it's hilarious. They will come out with, some of them I won't repeat on the podcast. I don't know what age rating you've got on this, but yeah, some of them you can't repeat, but they will tell you how it is, and that is refreshing at times. But also, you have to be conscious and aware that not everybody is like that, and you've got 11 other children in front of you who are not used to that. So sometimes it's maybe recognizing the triggers before they occur. And as a father, I think that's helped me to understand when one of my children is going a particular way in a conversation, and you have to steer them back and say, no, we'll talk about something else now. So there's an element of that. So boundaries. Something else that I wouldn't say this is a struggle. This is actually quite amusing at times. Literal interpretation. So a big part of a certain element of autism is that things will be taken very literally. So I'll give you an example, and I won't use the player's name to save their embarrassment. But we were demonstrating an exercise, a drill, a game, whatever you want to call it, and I used a piece of language that you would understand as a coach, and that most players would. Where the ball came to my feet, and I said, "Pick up the ball and go," and I literally would run with the ball at my feet. Comes to the child, you shout, "Pick up the ball and go," and they pick up the ball literally with their hands and they go. So it's funny. They find it funny. The parents are laughing. So I think sometimes the literal interpretation, there's many of those. That's where demonstrations come in. And this as a youth coach anyway, most of what you do on the pitch should be demonstrating to them rather than giving an instruction. And I mean, you fire words at a 9-year-old and see how long it takes for them to turn off, whereas stand in front of them and show them, and they'll buy in. So there's that. The less amusing side of it sometimes, and this is maybe something that the player has to deal with, is you would have no doubt heard the term meltdown. Your kids have probably had meltdowns in their time, but unfortunately they tend to be a bit different with ASD children. They seem to be wholly necessary. They're required. They're a release valve for them dealing with pressures that we wouldn't understand, and you have to allow that. Now, going back to when I spoke about league and competition football, there isn't really a place for that. You cannot stop a competitive league game of 22 players at certain ages because one player is having a meltdown. You can't do it. It's not practical. So in our setup at Street League, we can. So we have had cases where players will, the noise will become too much for them. I'm going to use the word noise in inverted commas, and I'll go back to that in a second. The noise becomes too much for them. The fact they're on the losing team, if we're doing a game at the end of a session, may become too much for them. Failure sensitivity is difficult anyway with children. Put them in a football setting, a competitive setting, it's even worse. So helping them to understand, the result is irrelevant, and we have some methods for doing that, which I'll talk about in a second. So, meltdowns is one. So it's allowing them to leave the pitch. If you need to go and sit behind the goals and have 2 minutes to cool down, do it. Not in a you've been naughty kind of way, but more of a off you go and do what you need to do, and then come back when you're ready. You've got your process, you know what it is, off you go. So they can do that with us. Noise. I mentioned noise earlier, and I purposely put it in inverted commas. Sensory overload is probably a better name for it. Now, we call it noise because that's what the children call it. It's what my children call it. I was mistakenly under the impression for a long time, Craig, that noise was literally just noise, auditory noise that you can hear, that perhaps is too loud, that you and I may think is okay, but to them it's a lot. It's not just about the volume. It's about the direction. It's about where it's coming from, how much of it's coming in that direction. So to deal with noise, we ask the parents, don't give instruction. So no doubt you do this anyway. It's a common thing. But with us, it's very, very important. Some of our children cannot handle instructions coming from their peers on the pitch, 2 different coaches, and a set of parents. They can't. It's difficult enough for any typical 7 or 8 or 9-year-old. It's near on impossible if you have a certain element of neurodiversity. You just can't process it. Inevitably, excess noise leads to meltdown. That can happen. So we try and nip that in the bud early by reducing the noise. I put the word noise in inverted commas earlier because it was quite recently, and it was my youngest, Lucas, who helped me understand that I didn't really grasp this until then, but noise isn't just auditory noise. So the example I use is, and this was only a few months ago, we had a session and we left, and Lucas and I sat in the car, and I said to him what you normally say, rather than how do you think you played, it's did you enjoy that? What would you do differently next week? All the standard questions. So I said to him, did you enjoy that? And for the first time, he said, no. And going back to this brutal honesty that they give you sometimes, he said, no, I didn't. And I said, okay, what didn't you enjoy? He said, it was very busy. And I said, what do you mean busy? He said, I just felt like everybody was here and coming at me from different angles and was behind me. And I said, do you mean the noise, the volume? And he said, no, like everybody around me. And I realised then it's not just auditory noise, it's visual. There can be too many things happening at the same time. So what we've tried to do, it's not a result of this, but it ties in nicely. The FA's model of playing through the thirds, and I don't know if you're familiar with their DNA now of take it from the back, play it all the way through. So we third off the pitch. And by breaking the pitch into thirds, it allows us to do 2 things. It allows us to drown out that noise that we're talking about, the visual noise. All of a sudden, you haven't got 7-year-olds running around. You've got 3 because I've split the pitch. It also allows us to box them by ability as well. No point in having someone who's at the top end of the group putting flying tackles in against somebody who started last week. Pointless. So hopefully in time that will bear out. But that's something that I've only recently. I think I always knew it, but I think he really put it into words for me. Lucas did, and I thought, yeah, I understand that now. Something that helps. Years when I first qualified, I went out to local clubs and asked if I could shadow some coaches because I was very honest and said I don't know what I'm doing. I want to shadow. I want to learn. And Tamworth FC came back to me, and I went to their ground and did a session with them. And when I walked in, the ground was silent, and I thought, okay, maybe there's no parents here watching. They were training at the ground itself. I thought maybe there's no parents here. When I got in, there were parents there. There were parents, there was coaching staff, but everybody was silent. And I thought either I'd gone deaf or I was down the blues again. But I didn't know which it was. But I walked in and I realised that they were coaching in silence. Now, I don't know if you've ever come across this, that he was running a silent session. It wasn't silent because he was catering to any diverse children that I'm aware of. He ran the whole session in silence, an hour, which was admirable. And I thought, wow. When I asked Rich, what's the crack? What are you doing? He said, we're encouraging the children by not allowing them to speak. We're encouraging them to use other ways to communicate, whether it's body language, clapping, whatever it is. They're finding other ways. We find that they have to lift their head up more to look because they can't hear anybody. So we do that at Streetly. Do we do it because I'm trying to? Yeah, I think we do it because we're trying to encourage them to find other ways to communicate. But I also think it's great for the diverse kids because when you give them silence, it must. I can't imagine how it must feel when they've had 45 minutes of noise and then coach says, "Do you know what? Everybody now, absolute silence." And it's silent. Even the parents, to their credit, silence. Um, so yeah, some of those obstacles, with the meltdowns and the boundaries, it's about recognizing. The last thing I'll say on the boundaries is that with any of this, whether it's recognizing a boundary is about to be broke, or language, fruity language is about to be used, or a meltdown is about to occur, I think it's important that we see that early. And the only way we can see it early is if there are an adequate number of coaches to children. So we work on a maximum one coach to 12 kids. We try and do 10. So I think the FA rules are 14, I believe. I may be wrong. But the fewer children you've got, the more attention you can give them, and you can nip these things, head them off at the pass, and nip them in the bud. So yeah, I think I've answered your question in terms of boundaries and meltdowns and things, but those are the biggest obstacles, definitely.
Yeah, so that's really interesting stuff. The silent practice in particular, I can imagine for a child of those needs would be, I wouldn't say music to your ears because we're obviously working in silence, but I'm sure that must be an absolute blessing for them. That's amazing. Talking about blessings, the parents of these players, I've read the reviews, like I said, and like they're delighted. But when they come into the program, they must be really nervous. What advice or information do you give these parents to like reassure them that Strictly Coaching is, as you say, a safe place?
The first thing I'll say to them always is before I was a coach, I was a father, and before I was a coach, I was a father of neurodiverse children. So all my 3 boys were here, and we recognised in 2 of them already that they were diverse, and then my coaching career, if you want to call it that, began. So I went into it knowing that. So my first kind of advice to them is I'm a father who has children with extra needs. I understand. First of all, I understand your concerns as a parent. I understand your worries. I mentioned my youngest earlier, Lucas, and me not wanting to put him into league football. So I understand why people would want a setup like ours first and foremost. Yes, that would be that's my first one. The other one is as well because we're not in a competitive football environment, because we are just training. They can improve at their own pace. Now, their pace is, one child's pace is going to be 10% of another's, and that's absolutely fine. There's no collective goal with us. There's no league to win. There's no promotion to chase. There's no relegation to avoid. We're not trying to get them up to speed in a certain position because somebody's leaving at the end of the season. All the problems that you get, or the issues you get with league football, there's none of that. So they understand that, and I can give you many, many examples of children who are working at much slower paces, and they're happy to, and we're happy for them, and that's fine. The other thing with us is if it's not working and it's not for you, and we've had a conversation and we can't fix it, then you're free to go. By that, I mean there's no pressure on you to stay because we're halfway through a season and we're chasing a promotion and we've got nobody to play your position. The kind of issues that you have no doubt faced as a coach where somebody's left halfway through a season and left you in the lurch. There's none of that. If it's not for you, you're here on a month-by-month basis. You want to try it, come and try it. All our first sessions are completely free with no obligation. Come along and try. It may be for you, it may not be. We use the word trial. It's not that we are trialing them, it's that they are trialing us. I think that's important as well. We can simulate most things at Strictly Coaching, but pressure isn't one of them. No matter how much we try, we can't simulate pressure, nor do we want to a point. So they have no pressure. I think because we've been talking a lot about this, and I think I've mentioned the spectrum of ASD quite a few times. I think it's important for me to just clear something up if I can, Craig. The spectrum that you hear about, people are forgiven for thinking it's a linear spectrum. that runs from maybe mild to severe, and you're either here, here, here. It's not at all. The spectrum is actually a circle. So people should look up, if anybody's interested, they should look up the autism wheel, and it is literally a wheel with 10 segments, I believe. I can't tell you the 10 off the top of my head, but they range from all different behaviours. And within each spoke of the wheel, you are mild to severe. And then when you plot the graph around, it gives you the spider graph shape. Everybody's is different. So that's why when you say, I understand how an autistic child is, that's very, very difficult to do, because I have 2 autistic children. One is completely different to the other. They are chalk and cheese. Oliver has social issues that we mentioned earlier, and boundaries. Lucas doesn't. Not in a million years would he have those issues. He's manifest in other ways. So I'd encourage people to look up the autism wheel and understand that it's a circular wheel with different points in each spoke, not a linear. You're not just mild or severe or in between. You are different in different areas, and it forms this circle. So it's interesting to look up.
Andrew, when a parent comes to you and wants to join the club with their child, what information do they give you that helps you understand the best way to treat their child?
The only information we take is medical conditions. So if obviously they're standard things like their date of birth, obviously, but it's just simply medical conditions. What have they got? And what I do tell them is, tell me about any additional needs, confirmed or otherwise, because we went through a process where it takes years to get somebody diagnosed. Now, if you can suspect your child is ASD, and you may be wrong, you're probably not. You're probably right as a parent. Some behaviours can be mistaken for ASD, and it's not. But because of the ages they're coming to me, 7, 8, invariably there's no diagnosis at that age. It takes a long time. COVID didn't help. That held things up for a long time, including ours as well. So I don't want you to come to me and say to me, he or she has confirmed autism. But if you haven't had a confirmation, I don't want you to keep it from me. Just tell me. So I'm very medical conditions, confirmed or otherwise. And if they say we think, or he or she's been looked at this, then I will bear that in mind in the session. But to be honest, Craig, as well-meaning as the parents are, and they are, I don't want the ceiling to be placed from day one by the parent. So I'd rather just give me the information you have, and I'll get the child out there on the pitch and I'll watch them. And we were guilty of this, and me and my wife laugh about this now. We were terrified when our eldest, who has autism, was going to secondary school. More so my wife didn't want him to get the bus on his own or anything. And it turns out he's been an absolute boss. So I think we place ceilings on our children sometimes, as well as elevating them in other areas. Sometimes we think they're better than they are because they're ours. But in other circumstances, like ASD, I think we're guilty of placing those ceilings. And I'd rather just give me the info and leave me to it and let me watch. I'm not an expert in autism, but I know what I'm doing with coaching, so I can see when the two blend. So yeah, I would say my advice to them would be, confirmed or otherwise, just give me the information you've got.
That's fantastic stuff. We'll be back, Andrew, after a short message.
No problem.
Do you need fresh ideas for your football, soccer training? Then follow Session Share on YouTube and X. Our handles can be found in the show description. Session Share, for coaches, by coaches.
Welcome back. We just spoke about Andrew's amazing work he's done with the players of all needs and ability levels. As someone who has worked hard in growing an organisation while keeping standards high and focusing so much on the attention of each individual player who needs it, what advice would you give a coach who is starting up trying to emulate some of the successes that you've had in the world of coaching?
Yeah, good question. I think we touched on it earlier, so I won't go into great detail. But demonstrate would be my number one. It less words, more action. I think show the player what you mean. Our language as an adult to a child is so different, and you and I, whether we're coaches or not, as adults, we could have a conversation. I could use certain words to do with football you would understand. 7-year-old hasn't got a clue what we're talking about. So demonstrate, especially in my realm where a third of your children are ASD and they literally need that demonstration. So demonstrate would be number one. Something that's a bugbear of mine, and some of the coaches who've been on it previously, no doubt, have talked about this, but it's when a player's standing still. It drives me mad. So that's not just in a training sense, but on the pitch during a game as well. So I would say make sure that your players aren't standing still. I think if they're standing still, it's dead time, it's wasted time. Sometimes it's unavoidable, no doubt. So, you might want a queue of children for an exercise that you're doing, hopefully not. But can that queue be halved and split between two coaches? And also, if you do have a queue, can the children in the queue have something to be doing while they're waiting? Even if they're just knocking a ball back and forth. I'm confident that if you were to come down to Streetly Coaching and get the children on the pitch and ask them a question, what's the easiest thing to do on a football pitch, they would all say nothing, because we've drilled that into them, that nothing is the easiest thing to do. And the second thing would be, if you find yourself doing nothing, do something. So as a coach, encourage the children to do something, whether that's scanning, moving into space, finding space, ensuring you're in the right position, pulling up a teammate. I'm all for that. If your teammate's not doing what they should be, pull them up on it. I think the biggest one, though, the third and final one, I would advise any new coach that you have to be willing to adapt. You have to drop your ego. You could plan a session the night before, and you know what it's like, and maybe I'm giving the secrets of the game away here, but when you're a new coach, you plan everything. You plan to a minute. And then as you do it a few more years, you realise, okay, I'm going to get an idea of this. This is what I'm going to do, but this bit will be flexible and we'll see how this goes, and they may lead me. Get to that part sooner, because I think if you plan, if you're rigid in your planning and you're not willing to adapt, and after 10 minutes, the session isn't working, you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. And I think you've got to be willing to change the session. And going back to the fact that we have diverse children and then being direct at times, they will tell you in 10 minutes if your session is rubbish. They will use that language, Craig. They will say, Coach, this is rubbish. I'm not enjoying this. And you have to take that on board. You can't be, you can have no ego. You can't have pride. You've just got to say, yeah, fair enough. Let's try this. How about this that we did 2 weeks ago? Yeah, I love that, Coach. Right. Let's crack on with that. So drop your ego and change your plans. Will be my last one.
Those kids certainly keep us on our toes, don't they? That's for sure. So on a lighter note to end the episode, what's your favourite moment in sports? It can be anything, as a player, a fan, as a coach.
Well, I mean, I'm going to pull out the obvious one here. The 2011 Carling Cup win when we beat Arsenal in the last minute. I was at Wembley. I was right behind the goal when the ball went in. Yeah, I mean, obviously the cliche answer should be anything that my children do. Anytime my eldest scores a goal from the wing or my youngest puts a game-saving tackle in, I think that's probably true. The emotions are similar, but yeah, 2011 Carling Cup win, definitely.
I feel like I need to develop one of those old-fashioned 90s boo buttons, for whenever I have a Birmingham City fan on the podcast. That's for sure. So
you certainly do, mate. Yeah, good idea.
Well, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I think this has been a very valuable episode because I'm sure a lot of our listeners will agree. This is an area that I am not too familiar with, and an area that I definitely want to understand better. And I feel this episode alone has helped me get to and better understanding. I'm certainly not, just like you said about yourself earlier, I'm certainly not going to claim to be an expert in this. But the work you're doing, Andrew, is fantastic. And I do really much appreciate you for your time. It's been a lot of fun chatting back and forward. The conversation was very beneficial. Andrew, before we go, is there any way our listeners can get in touch with you?
You can go to Facebook. It's the only social media channel we're on. If you go to Facebook and look up Streetly Coaching, it's Streetly spelled STREETLY, Streetly Coaching, and we're on there. Apparently, we're on Instagram. My number two, Dave, has done an Instagram channel. I know nothing about it, so go and check that out as well. Strictly Coaching on Instagram. But yeah, you can find us on there.
Superb. And what we'll do as well for our listeners as well, as I'm sure a lot of people, if you are experiencing some of these issues that with your child, and if you're in and around the Birmingham area, obviously you can maybe go and visit Andrew's sessions, have an opportunity. If you're not in or around the Birmingham area, but you do have any questions about football, soccer, I'm sure Andrew would be able to hear you out as well. So I will put his details in our podcast description. Well, that's about all we have on today's episode of Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. Thank you again, Andrew Stevenson, for joining us. Be sure to get in touch across all our socials to offer your opinions and on all that we have discussed. You can find our social media platforms in the podcast description. This has been Session Share, the Coaches Podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coaching the beautiful game.